Like this show and want to make your own? Let me tell you about Anchor. It's free, and they have creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. And now you can even add any song from Spotify directly to your episodes. The possibilities are endless for what you can create, whether it's music analysis, your own radio show, or something the world's never heard before. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. And you can also make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
Welcome to the Vocal Fries Podcast, the podcast about linguistic discrimination.
I'm Carrie Gillen.
And I'm Megan Figueroa. And Carrie, I learned a new word.
What? Awesome. What word did you learn?
Slides.
Slides?
Slides. Okay, so the context was in this viral tweet from, is it yesterday? The 22nd. And so I think this is something that people retweet all the time. You know how sometimes viral tweets are just repurposed, kind of recycled. Yeah. So it was a picture of these Nike slip-on sandals.
Oh.
Did you see it?
No.
And it was okay, well basically it was the woman who posted it, or this little story goes, I thought that these were kid sandals, but it turns out the sun shrunk my size 9 slides. So the sun shrunk my slides.
Okay.
And I had never heard slides before. Have you?
I think I have. It's not an active part of my vocabulary, though. And so I'm trying to think, is this something I've heard in person, or have I only seen it written? I feel like I've heard it in person.
And so, I'm looking at this type of sandal, and it makes sense because your foot slides in.
Yeah.
Slides, just that exact sandal, have always been chanclas to me.
So can you explain what chanclas are? Is it all sandals, or is it a particular kind of sandal?
So they're definitely that kind of slip-on sandal for me. I think they can be any sort of house shoe. Yeah, so, you see these stereotypical jokes with about throwing chanclas at kids and stuff. But yeah, so they're definitely these slides for me. They could be other types of house shoes for people. You're not going to call your party high heel type shoe sandals chanclas.
Hold up. Who wears high heel sandals? Probably everybody does.
Okay, wait. So that's where this problem comes in for me too, where sandals are anything to me where your toes show.
Okay. All right. That's fair. I don't have that exact same lexical entry, but that kind of makes sense, though. All right.
Yeah. So a high heel is technically a sandal to me if it has
the toes showing.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And it doesn't matter if it's a slip-on or if there's some sort of, it's a wedge that needs to be tied. I don't know. Mm-hmm. It's a sandal to me.
Okay.
But yeah, so slides. I obviously don't have that in my lexicon, so I don't know how far that goes. If it's just those kind of literally your foot is sliding into it.
That's my interpretation, but again, I'm not sure it's an active part of my vocabulary, so I don't trust my judgment.
Yeah. So, I won't be using this, obviously, but I was happy to see that.
I always like it when I learn a new word.
Yeah, when you started, when you said, what is it, toque? I was like, what is this?
Yes.
Just say beanie. You're in America. Just kidding.
Yeah, but beanie sounds so... Okay, to me, a beanie is those hats with the propeller on top. So if I say beanie, it just sounds so goofy.
Yeah.
So this is from Laura. Hi, Megan and Carrie. I recently finished my MSc, Masters of Science, in Linguistics/Cognitive Science of Language. And although I'm new to listening to podcasts, yours has been on my to-listen-to list for ages. I can't believe I put it off for so long. I love the topics you cover, and I think the concept of teaching people how not to be an asshole about language is so important. Oh my god, thank you so much.
Yes. Yes, and congrats, by the way.
Yes, definitely congrats. I've noticed that you've mentioned wanting to provide transcriptions for your episodes, and I wanted to reach out to you to offer my services as a transcriptionist. I've experienced transcribing verbatim speech in a linguistics lab environment and naturalistic speech transcription, both minimally edited and intelligent styles. As a linguist, I'm familiar with the topics you cover and love research, which is always a part of transcription. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for your consideration. Please keep up the great work. So, we definitely do need a transcriptionist, but until we hit our second goal on Patreon, we are not paying for it. But we will as soon as we hit that $300 a month. And we're kind of close.
Kind of.
Anybody who wants to, throw $1 a month at us, or $3 or $5.
Anyone who appreciates what this hustle we're hustling over here.
Respect the hustle.
Respect the hustle.
But yeah, so as soon as we have that, then we'll reach out. We've had 2 offers so far, actually. And we definitely would like to pay people who really do know linguistics, because there's a lot of jargon that we try to explain, but still it's not always transparent to a non-expert, for sure.
For sure. So yeah, what was that? Patreon.com/vocalfriespod?
That's right.
Actually, I just got that tattooed onto my body in case I have to, don't even have to say it out loud anymore.
And if you're at the $5 level, you get bonus episodes. And this month, we're going to have to record it and put it out early because I'm going to be in Telluride.
Oh, how lovely.
Yes. Going to the film festival, volunteering. So.
Oh, cool.
I can't wait to see who makes me the most nervous, because there's going to be a ton of celebrities.
Oh, my God.
Yep.
My first thought, for some reason, I really want you to meet Walter Goggins.
Oh, that would be amazing. Yeah. My first thought was Taika Waititi, but there's no guarantee that his movie will be there. So
yeah. Well, anyway.
But he does have a movie hitting all the film festivals, so
yeah. I don't know if Walter Goggins does, or if I was just thinking about Justified right now.
Oh, I have no idea. There's a good chance, and he also could just come.
He could. Because he's, anyway. All right. So, and one more shout out before we get to the episode, which is awesome because I learned a lot, as always, as my ignorant self, about anything that's outside of the United States. And even then. But the Lily.com and journalist, okay, let me get this right. Because she appreciates props. Kristen Millarez Young. I want to say Millares. I don't think that's her middle name. It's Spanish.
I think it sounds amazing. So even if it was not her real name, if it were me, I'd be like, yes.
Yes. She did a great article on with friend of the podcast, Dr. Alex Darcy, the scholar. So we have an episode on
with Alexandra Darcy.
With Alex. And it's a really fun episode and one of our most listened to because it's, people love to hate people love to love So those are 2 reasons. But also it's a really good episode because Alex is great to talk to.
Yeah, it's a good one for sure.
And I think that speaks to how well this is written too. Not only is Kristen just a great writer, great, journalist, obviously asking Alex the right questions, but Alex, it came out great, I thought. And it was getting props around linguist Twitter too. People saying ask a linguist, yay, this person asked a linguist.
Yes. Please, for the love of God, ask a linguist if it's about language.
Yeah.
But she did, so good.
Yeah. And it's just a short little thing, but there's 2 pull quotes and they're both great. So this one, seemingly innocuous stereotypes such as associating with vapid women have real consequences.
100%.
Boom. Yes. Yes. So,
yes. Awesome.
Yeah. So I thought that was a really great article to see about linguistics. But I think that I don't care if someone was somehow gets a technical thing wrong as much as I care about like what happened with Vocal Fry, like this journalism that happened in Vocal Fry with 2011. Like that's the kind of consequences. Like it basically started a movement toward hating Vocal Fry in the US and associating it with women because of what we're reading in the media. So
Yes, I absolutely agree with you. It is worse when it's actually harming people as opposed to getting a technical detail wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, I still complain a little bit about the technical details because sometimes I'm just like, what is that? But it's not really actively harming people, so.
Exactly. It's only a little grating to linguists who know exactly where the error is or whatever, and I'm like,
right, yeah, exactly.
You can handle it. You can handle this.
yeah. It's like annoying as opposed to like, oh no.
Yeah, exactly. So there is no misinformation in this article. Yay!
That's amazing. So I just want to make a tiny little correction that a mistake I made in the actual interview.
Oh.
I said that Canada became fully independent in 81. It's actually 82.
That is so embarrassing for you. So embarrassing. Listen, we have to have one of us that remains steadfast in being knowledgeable. Well, I will be over here
knowledgeable. I don't want to be like wrong when it's an easy thing to correct.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
Like it's okay if I'm wrong and then I find out later, but I already was like, oh, I should have like looked that date up before I said anything.
Yeah, well.
But anyway, this was a really fun episode. I mean, to record, but also to edit because I got to listen to so many Scottish accents, and it's like, these are my people.
Yeah.
So like true. I just was like all warm and fuzzy inside and anyway.
Yeah, and I got to be that person who always asks a Scottish person about train spotting.
I mean, to be fair, it is a very famous and kind of important movie. It's not like it's like some toss-off movie that no one cares about or
like what's
not meaningful.
Like, Paul Blart Mall Cop or something.
So if anyone who's listening, let us know what the Scottish equivalent is of Paul Blart Mall Cop. Because I guarantee there's something really terrible that we've never seen because...
Yeah, I mean, Americans don't have the, monopoly on making terrible movies. So, right?
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely not. Yeah. No. I mean, how could it be that?
We're not so special. We're not as special as we think. Anyway, hope you enjoy.
Okay, so today we have as our very special guest the host of Accentricity, which is another podcast about linguistic discrimination, Dr. Sadie Ryan.
Hi, Sadie.
Hello.
I'm so happy to have you on our show. I love talking to other podcasters because...
Really happy.
Yeah,
Me too.
Like, we're all in the same kind of weird struggle that's like very unique to podcasting.
Yes. Totally. We'll need to not get too sidetracked talking about the intricacies of... We need to keep on the topic of language.
Well, and then to meet another podcaster that podcasts about language. It's like this beautiful overlap that is just so exciting.
Yes.
And a woman, another woman. I read... I always see on Twitter, people are like, give me some podcast recs that are like hosted by women. Like people are always saying... I only listen to like podcasts hosted by men and I don't mean to, but that's just how it is. So I just, I'm like, you're not trying hard enough for one thing, but.
Although I have read, I don't know if this is accurate, but it seems likely that 80% of podcasters are men.
Really?
Wow.
So it is harder to find female podcasts. However, there are so many of them now.
Yeah.
That you can.
Yeah. And it was cool to see. Yeah, I saw that post and we were tagged and Lingthusiasm were tagged.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
There are so many linguistics podcasts hosted by women.
Yeah, they really are.
Specifically. Yeah.
That's awesome.
I don't want to say all. I'm sure there are linguistic podcasts hosted by people of other genders, but I don't think I've heard them yet.
No.
Well, Lexicon Valley.
Oh, okay, I've not heard that one.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's John McWhorter.
Okay.
I'm sure there are other. Well, there are lexitecture, which is more about like
Lexicography.
lexicography, but that's I still consider that linguistics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's half male, half female, and half Canadian, half Scottish.
Oh.
Cool. Oh, I need to listen to more linguistics podcasts.
Yeah.
I need to widen my listening scope.
Oh yeah, so we
Cool.
got so 3 different nationalities here represented.
Yeah.
Although
Yeah.
I'm very ashamed of mine, so we're not going to talk about that.
Even though we happen to be recording on Independence Day.
Yeah. American Independence Day, that is. Because
Yeah.
Canadian Independence Day was like 3 days ago, right?
Well, it's technically not really Independence Day. It was just the day that Canada was formed as a country.
Oh, okay.
We didn't fully get our independence until like 1981.
Okay.
So,
And
yeah, anyway.
And Sadie, you're in Glasgow.
Glasgow.
Oh,
Yes,
I'm
I
sorry.
am, yes.
Okay. Do people say both? I mean, one can be wrong, I guess, but let's not be prescriptive here.
Except when it comes to names,
Okay,
we're a little
fine.
prescriptive, right?
Glasgow.
And Carrie, do you have family in Glasgow? Is
I
that
do have extended family, yeah. So my grandmother, my
Cool.
maternal grandmother's family comes from Glasgow.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Oh, do they still live in Glasgow or?
Or Paisley, actually, yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay, yeah. Yeah.
So I've been to
Yeah, so-
Paisley one time.
Oh, cool. Excellent. Yeah. So, yeah, Paisley's just right next to Glasgow.
Yeah.
But I think it might, I don't want to get this. I think it's in the greater Glasgow area, but I might be wrong about that.
I believe so as well, but what do I know?
It definitely has a very separate identity. I do know that.
Yes, it does. Cool.
I've had this very, awful stereotype about Scottish accents because of Train Spotting that I wouldn't be able to understand anyone from Scotland. But we can talk about that more later. Let's talk about your podcast first.
Yeah,
We should definitely come back to Train Spotting.
Yes.
We will definitely. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Okay. So why did you want to start your podcast?
Yeah, so I imagine it was not so different from you guys, where I had seen that there's quite a lot of assholery around language. And I assume I'm allowed to swear, right?
Yes, you're absolutely allowed to swear.
Since your motto is don't be an asshole. So I'd noticed how much assholery there is around language, and I was doing my PhD, and I was coming across linguistic discrimination, and I just wanted to try and tackle that. And specifically, so I had a conversation with a friend who, and a lot of this assholery comes from people who are otherwise great, right? So it seems like there are a lot of people who language is sometimes like the last vestige of this specific area where people feel like they can make fun of particular identities and particular groups of people. So it was a friend of mine who was like, yeah, linguistic equality, and you shouldn't make fun of the way people speak and stuff. And you shouldn't make fun of people's accents, but I hate it so much when people say I done it instead of I did it. That was their point. And I was like, listen, who gets to decide which is the right one and which is the wrong one?
Right, exactly.
And just because one is used by people in authority and one is used by the most powerful groups in society and one is maybe more widespread than the other, although I'm not even sure about that, does that make one right and one wrong? And this friend of mine who, as I say, is good, is generally into social justice, was like, oh God, yeah, you're right. Oh, oops.
Yeah.
Good.
And I was like, wow, sometimes, not always, but sometimes that's all it takes.
Yeah.
And sometimes is enough for me if occasionally that is all it takes to make somebody stop and think about what they've been fed and what they've been taught about language, and to kind of question this idea of there being certain ways of speaking that are correct and certain ways of speaking that are, vulgar or just wrong or uneducated. That is good enough. And of course, it's not always enough. People are probably always going to be assholes about language.
Yes, absolutely.
If you can, I think the people that I really want to talk to with the podcast are either So a lot of the people who listen already know. So to some extent, I'm sure I am preaching to the choir. But the people that I really want to reach with the podcast are either people who are already interested in language but haven't thought about how it connects with social justice, and people who are already interested in social justice but haven't thought about how it connects with language.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of room for kind of showing people and getting people to think about how language and social justice interact. So that was kind of what I wanted to do. And also just, I was doing my PhD, so I was in the university learning loads about language and doing loads of research. And then I was at parties having really great conversations with people who weren't linguists about language and identity. And I thought, I should really bring these two things together and sort of bring together linguistic theory and research with fun conversations with friends.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is you're doing a PhD and you're like, how could I do more work?
Basically. And as I was saying to you guys earlier, that's why it's been a long time in production. So I started working on it. I remember sort of crystallizing the idea when I was at a conference in Amsterdam. I went over with my boyfriend and we drove to Amsterdam. So we had this kind of long journey of kind of chatting and thinking about stuff. And we were chatting and listening to a lot of podcasts as well. And the idea kind of came together then. But that was about a year before I started releasing it. And in between that time, I just tried recording in some ways and it was rubbish, and then tried recording in other ways and it was rubbish. And then sort of managed to bring together eventually something that I'm really proud of. But I was a bit of a perfectionist about it. Like I sort of wanted to get it just right before I released it.
Yeah, it's really hard to let something of you out into the world like this, like podcasting does, especially with, something as personal as language. I think that our podcasts like ours speak to so many people too, because language is this very human thing.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and you're totally right on about how otherwise very good people are so might be ignorant
assholes
on this topic. Yeah, assholes. But they're very willing to hear you on this. So, I mean, otherwise, both of our podcasts wouldn't. No one would listen.
There'd be no point.
Yeah, there'd be no point.
And I think there's so much misinformation about language that really gets drilled into us. I don't want to, not all teachers, not all schools, but I think definitely in my school education, one of my earliest kind of memories about language was in primary school, and we had this video that we had to watch. And then the teacher was like, "Oh, do you have any questions about this video?" And it was a guy, a Jamaican guy speaking in the video. And this wee boy called Jamie Sim, I remember both his names, put up his hand and he was like, "Miss, where's he comfy?" And she was like, "Excuse me?" And he was like, they used to do this thing sometimes where they would pretend they didn't understand you, even though they did. And he was like, where's he comfy? And she was like, "He doesn't come fee anywhere. He comes from Jamaica." And Jamie was like quite a shy wee boy. And I just remember his face going beetroot and thinking, just feeling terrible for him. And I think that when it gets drilled into you in that way at school, sometimes you can leave school with just this assumption that, people, I think, sometimes leave school thinking, well, yeah, I believe in equality. I believe everyone should have the same chances. But, people from disadvantaged backgrounds or marginalised communities just should make an effort and learn to speak properly. And, people have that idea. And like you say, it often isn't that hard to shift. Sometimes it just, it takes a little bit of saying, look, language isn't just about, not everybody wants to speak the same way. There's different, it's to do with identity, and it's to do with your family and your community and where you come from. And that's really important to people. I think don't be an asshole, but also I like to try and understand where that assholery comes from
yeah.
as well.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it tells us a lot about how to approach people too if we know where it's coming from. Because again,
That's true.
A lot of us learned it at school. It's reinforced like every day in some manner. So it's just everywhere. But all it takes is just to stop and think about it. And I just want to pat us on the back and say good job to us.
And I feel bad. I don't want to be, I especially don't want to be bad-mouthing teachers in schools, because I did this we had this workshop for teachers at Glasgow Uni the week before last. And it was teachers who wanted to learn how to work with Scots in their classrooms and bring stuff about language other than standard English into the classroom. And I was talking to like the most amazing teachers, and now I feel like we're going to be fine.
That was nice. Yeah.
So it's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, no, you're right.
Yeah.
Like, I think especially now that this message is starting to be put out there by not just us, teachers are becoming more aware of the problem and are not being part of the problem so much anymore. But from our generation, many of them were. Maybe even all of them at the time. I don't know.
Yeah. And in Scotland, it's been amazing to see the change. So it's hard to know because I don't know how representative my school experience was. And maybe I was just very unlucky. But there's definitely now in schools in Scotland just amazing stuff being done to do with language. And now, like, Scots is part of the curriculum for a lot of schools, and there's loads being done to sort of talk about ways of speaking other than standard English in schools, and it's really amazing to see. And yeah, like I say, I don't know if I was just unlucky in school, but I think this is a change from my school days.
I think so.
Well, and a lot of teachers speak quote unquote standard English, right? At least back in the day. And so it's like these are people that don't really have to think about, beyond their own accent, really, because no one was pushing them to. And, unless you're from this a marginalized group, you're probably not thinking about it. Again, unless people start talking about it. So,
although I would assume most teachers in Scotland were Scottish and so would have at least somewhat non-standard dialect in their background.
Yeah. So certainly a lot of teachers, and the teachers I've been kind of working with and speaking to over the past wee while, I've spoken to quite a few people actually who've said that like they feel that now it is about, they're learning about how to teach the kids that come to them, but they're also kind of facing up to the linguistic discrimination they've suffered themselves in the past and sort of, like rethinking the fact that not everything they were taught about language in school was necessarily right. I was at a conference recently which was about it was in part about kind of Scots and education and the future of it. And they were talking about how one of the challenges is that a lot of the people who are now teaching it, it wasn't their language wasn't necessarily nurtured and supported in that way. So there's kind of a little bit of a gap there that they have to work quite hard to sort of catch up almost. So that's really interesting to see as well. But yeah, talking to the teachers I was speaking to last week and also people I've been speaking to over the past couple of years, I feel like there's a lot of kind of will and a lot of desire to make things better and change. And I think I'm going to tentatively say I think we're going in a good direction in the way that language is being used in schools in Scotland just now.
That's great.
Will you tell me a little bit about the social hierarchy in Scotland? Because I think that'll help me understand like what's happening with the dialects or all of this, because I have no idea. No idea.
So it's very, I guess it's not, every place is complicated linguistically.
Sure, yeah.
So Scotland, so if we talk about Scots, we're really talking about lots of different ways of speaking. So I'm from the Central Belt, so I grew up in Edinburgh and I've now been in Glasgow for about 10 years. So kind of the middle-ish bit of Scotland, the lowlands. And then the way that I speak sounds very different from people who are. So in the northeast, there's a variety which gets called Doric, where it sounds quite different, and it has a lot of different vocabulary and syntax and phonology.
So on a Saturday afternoon, you can come down the road to Pittodrie and see the Dandy Dons play football.
And then then there's kind of central Scotland area, down south from the central belt, there's like the Borders and Dumfries and Galloway. And then if you go far, far, far north, you've got the Orkney Islands and the Shetland Islands.
No, this is where the fun and games start.
The way that the Scots they have is very influenced by Scandinavian languages. So I've actually been working on a project recently just as an assistant, which is kind of a map of Scotland. And it's a huge project. It's there, I think, maybe 250 communities in Scotland. People have gone and recorded older speakers and younger speakers in those communities. And so I've been sort of transcribing and things like that. And I'm very, very familiar with Central Belt Scots, but I wouldn't necessarily be able to understand older speakers from Shetland when they're speaking to other people from Shetland. So there's this kind of geographical spread, which is quite big. But then there's also a lot of code switching where people will speak differently. So I'm not a massive code switcher. I mostly sound a bit like this. But there are other people who would sound completely different when they're speaking to someone from their community and when they're speaking to someone outside their community. And then there's also social class hierarchy, particularly in the Central Belt. So from what I understand, I think it's not quite the same up north and in Shetland and Orkney. But in the Central Belt, there's definitely so I know that in Glasgow, there's been a lot of research done which shows that there's this really like a really big split between middle class speech and working class speech. And Edinburgh would be the same. I've not seen as much research on that as Edinburgh, but I grew up there, so I know from my own experience. So there's kind of all these different splits between who speaks in what way and at what time. So sorry, that was a massively complicated answer.
No, it was actually very helpful. I'm wondering is the accent that you have, or the dialect that you speak, do you think that you don't code switch because yours isn't as marginalized, or is that?
I think so, yeah. So I would have pretty Scottish, they call it Scottish Standard English. So yeah, I would have like pretty middle class sounding speech. Although I have been made fun of for not sounding posh and been made fun of for sounding posh. So
so you're right in the middle then.
So I'm somewhere in the middle probably. But yeah, more at like, I think people who aren't from Scotland don't tend to struggle to understand me. And I've not experienced the kind of linguistic discrimination that other people from my school often experienced. My school, I grew up in a very working class community and went to a very working class school. So I think I've seen more linguistic discrimination than I've experienced myself. So I'm very aware of it. But yeah, I've been quite fortunate in the way that people tend to respond to my accent. I've never felt that my accent's really blocked me from anything. Yeah, so that's kind of been interesting to sort of think about and look at too. I did my PhD research in a working class high school in Glasgow in the East End, and the kids there thought I was super posh. And there's this funny thing that people do sometimes in Glasgow where I don't know if it's just Glasgow, it might be Scotland in general, but if they think you sound posh, they'll be like, "Are you English?" So
yeah,
when I went to
another
the school,
layer there.
a few of the kids were like, "Are you?" Like asked me if I was English, which was very strange because it's like, I'm sure I don't sound English at all, but
no, you do not sound English. You sound very Scottish.
I don't think so. And I realised if I'm doing the map of Scotland, I missed out Gaelic there.
Ba ui vor acum sy'n jesped shores gas gan the chud mi taich ri immersed in the UNESCO yan Gaelic inuri.
So I probably don't have to tell you guys this, but occasionally with my students, I have to clarify that Gaelic is very, very different from Scots and English. People sometimes kind of think that it's somewhere on that kind of continuum that we have between English and Scots. But English and Scots are kind of very closely related ways of speaking. And Gaelic is from a completely different language family and sounds entirely different. It's historically been spoken much more in the northwest of Scotland, so up in the Western Isles, in Lewis and Skye, and the islands around there. And yeah, I'm planning to start learning Gaelic quite soon, which I'm very excited about.
Yeah.
My boyfriend speaks it, so I think it's only polite.
It's also spoken a little bit in Nova Scotia.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So Nova Scotia is the biggest Gaelic-speaking community outside of Scotland, right? And yeah, I think there's still people in Nova Scotia who would learn it as their first language, right? I think
From
so. What I know.
Yeah, I think so.
So I was kind of reading about this recently. So maybe like alongside English as their kind of first, air quotes, first language.
And also, there's
kind of
also a lot of French there too. So.
Oh, cool! Very interesting.
Yeah.
And then obviously also in Scotland, we've got loads and loads of other heritage and community languages and Scottish varieties of British Sign Language. So I've been learning about this recently, but British Sign Language obviously varies across the UK, but it has very particular kind of dialects in Glasgow and Edinburgh and around Scotland. So that's something I really want to find more about in the future.
So can you explain because I think a lot of people won't know, what is the difference or similarity or like what's going on between Scots and Scottish English?
All right. So they very much exist on a continuum for a lot of speakers. So I'll give as an example the kids I work with for my PhD research. So they were kids in this working class community in this high school in Glasgow. And they were speaking Scottish Standard English in some situations and then kind of moving towards Glaswegian Scots in others. And there's not really like a straightforward dividing line there. It's more just a matter of kind of shifting between different ways of speaking. And you couldn't necessarily always put your finger on, okay, now they're speaking Glaswegian Scots, now they're speaking Scottish Standard English. But part of my PhD research was I recorded these kids in 3 different situations. So I recorded them with their pals in an after-school club, and I gave them these wee headset microphones, and then I was like, go run, go have fun. And I recorded them kind of speaking to each other, so they weren't really interacting with me or the other adults in the class. They were kind of doing their own thing, and they were fighting and shouting and crying and screaming and all sorts. So that was kind of them using their kind of playground language, their sort of peer group language. And that was much more Glaswegian Scots forms. And I looked at kind of the syntax and the phonology and the words they were using, and they were much more kind of, ones that would be thought of as part of Glaswegian Scots. And then I recorded them. So once I got to know them for a while, I sat down with them and had kind of a long chat about their lives and their interests and what was going on with them. And by that point, they knew me quite well, so it was quite a sort of casual conversation. And then one of my supervisors, who they didn't know at that point, came in and spoke to them, and she kind of set up a very kind of classroom-ish situation where she gave them these books to look at, and then she sort of asked them kind of questions about these books, and it was much more what they'd experience in the classroom day to day. And in that situation, they moved right into Scottish Standard English. The conversations with me kind of represented a midpoint where they were sort of using, to speak broadly, they were kind of using a bit of Scots, bit of Scottish Standard English forms. But actually, so I looked at different linguistic features, and for some of the linguistic features, they kind of did the same thing when they were with their pals and with me. And I think that might be to do with the fact that those are features that I use a lot as well. Whereas my supervisor is not, she is from Mexico, so she doesn't really have a Scottish accent. So yes, I think they might have been kind of matching what the people they were speaking to were doing. So that it's kind of, so there's this continuum, and I think sometimes I've heard people get a bit frustrated when they're talking about Scots and the relationship between Scots and English, because, you know, like a lot of the words are the same in Scots and English. They're very closely related ways of speaking, and because there's not always this clear dividing line. But I've really come to love that. So I did an episode of the podcast about linguistic hygiene.
Yeah, I was just listening to that one.
And the idea of kind of separating out languages and keeping them in their place and putting them in their boxes. And I hadn't really thought of it in terms of Scotland before, but I just think I love that, because we can't necessarily draw a line and say that's Scots, that's English. We can't really put them in their boxes. So we have to just accept that we mix different ways of speaking, and we mix linguistic forms. And we maybe have to be a little bit less policey about the borders between languages. And I think that has a lot of potential. I think it's potentially quite cool. So I'm trying to embrace that at the moment, but it does make it very difficult when you're explaining and defining what Scots is and its relationship with English.
Yeah. What's the demographic information on like who would speak which? Like, is it younger, or is there anything like that is helpful?
Again, that's really difficult. It is, because so there's census information on it, and I'm trying to remember the numbers. I think it said that like a third of people identified as Scots speakers, but you know, a lot of those people had the same kind of school experience as me, where we were very much taught that we had English or we had bad. And we were very much taught that there was English and that was that, and there was not proper English, and we weren't really taught very much about Scots at all, or if we were, it was kind of disconnected from the way that we spoke. So it was sort of like there's these poets like Robert Burns and they write in Scots. So I think that if I hadn't studied linguistics, I might not have, you know, I think there will be a lot of people potentially who filled in the census form and were like, oh yeah, Robert Burns, a poet. Yeah, I don't think I speak like him, so I probably don't speak Scots.
Right. Right.
So it's difficult. So in terms of older and younger people, so with the Scots Syntax Atlas project I've been helping with, so it's focusing on Scots syntax, but they have got speakers from each community. They've got a set of speakers who are over 60 and a set of speakers who are under 25. And the difference between the way that those groups speak is really stark. I think that there's maybe an idea some people have that Scots is being spoken less, but I would argue it's just different. And, you know, all language changes over time. But the way that younger people and older people are speaking is definitely very different. And also kind of the way that older and younger people maybe think about their speech is quite different often. So yeah, I would say it's changing, but it's spoken by both young and old people.
Is there anything that's like a word or a phrase that's like canonically Scots that we wouldn't understand as English speakers?
Interesting. So yeah, like canonically Scots. Well, there's kind of everything I can think of is the sort of stuff that you get on tea towels, which is so cringy that I don't even want to say it, you know? Like obviously there's stuff like hi the new, but you guys would know what that meant.
Nope, don't know what that means.
No,
Yes, but
no.
not the rest of it.
This is like, so this is like this awful stereotype, which like, so people would kind of say it if they were doing an impression of a Scottish person and trying to be really funny. So okay, the new just means like, oh yes, just now. So
Something you would just normally say all the time.
Yeah, people would really say it. So I is yes and new is now. But it's the sort of thing, like you would get on like a postcard with a picture of a Highland cow or something. Mm-hmm. So I'm embarrassed to even. Oh, do you know what I use actually to describe it when I was recording with my kids? When I'm presenting in conferences and I want to show people kind of what the type of language is. So when I was recording with the kids in the after school club, one of the Glaswegian girls jumped on her pal's back and shouted "Giza Baki," which is give me a piggyback ride. But every single part of it would be different from standard English, apart from so geese is like geese give, geese is give us, and then a baccy is a piggyback ride. But even that word's different. So in Glasgow it's baccy, but when I was a kid it was collie bucky, and that was just over in Edinburgh. So it's so we have got quite different lexis in different places. Yeah, there's a lot of things that are different from place to place. So like when I was growing up in Edinburgh, the word for like kids or children was bairns. So that's like I don't want to get my facts right. I think that one is I think it's Norse influence.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I'm going to confidently say I think it's Norse influence. So bairns, and then in Glasgow, when I came to Glasgow, everyone was talking about wains, and I was like, "Well, what's that mean?" And wains is kind of the equivalent word in Glasgow. So even between these two cities, which are only like an hour's drive between them, there's quite a lot of differences in the ways of speaking, even between those places.
So let's talk about Edinburgh. So earlier Megan brought up Train Spotting, which is set in Edinburgh. Yeah. And they sound very different from you.
Oh, yeah. Completely. I would say completely different.
So it's a while since I watched Train Spotting, so I'm trying to remember exactly what they sound like. Do you know what? When I was growing up, I'm sure we thought that the people in Train Spotting sounded way too posh.
Oh, what?
Yeah, I'm sure we did. I'm sure we thought the actors were sort of making themselves easier for international audiences to understand.
Excuse
and I'm sure we felt a bit annoyed by
themselves
that.
easier to be understood.
They make you proud to be Scottish. It's shite being Scottish. But the law is to the law. The scum of the fucking earth. The most wretched, miserable, servile, pathetic trash that was ever shot into civilization.
I thought so, but it's been a while, so maybe I need to rewatch it after being away from Edinburgh for a while and see what I think.
It's so interesting to me because so they're not supposed to be posh at all in the movie.
No. The opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that was our problem, was we were like, these characters aren't posh, but the actors sound really posh. But I don't know. I mean, because Ewan McGregor is quite posh.
Yeah, he is, yes.
Yeah. So have you guys read the book or any of Irvin Welsh's books?
I have read one of them, but I don't remember which one it was. It was not Train Spotting. And yeah, it's like I had to train my brain to understand. Like I basically had to just say it out loud in my head kind of thing,
Yeah. So I think the way that he writes, definitely whenever I've read it, I've been like, that's really representative of working class Edinburgh speech. Like, I've not seen many writers where I've so much been like, oh yeah, I can hear that voice and I recognise it, when people are kind of trying to write accents or whatever. So yeah, I think he does a really good job of it. Yeah, but I don't know. Yeah, I need to watch Trainspotting again and be like, but I'm sure that was my impression when I was a kid. I'm sure I was like, ugh, that's not right.
Because yeah, like from a North American perspective, they do not sound posh. Robert Carlyle was the hardest for me to understand at the time. I mean, I could I got into it, but it took a minute.
So it comes today, they're the last shot, the deciding boy of the whole tournament. I'm in the black and he's sitting in the corner looking all fucking biscuit earthed. And this hard cunt comes in. Obviously fucking fancied himself like. Starts staring at me. Looking at me right fucking at me as if to say, come ahead, square go.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I watched it with captioning. I had to.
So you guys watch subtitles? Yeah.
I mean, but I was very young, so I mean, I guess I was like in high school when I watched it. So I had like no experience really with other accents, honestly. And that was like my first introduction. And I was like, well, I can never go over there because I wouldn't be able to understand anyone.
Well, you'd be fine.
It's really interesting. I think, that was a really interesting bit to do with the podcast because one of the things that so in the first episode I went and spoke to people around about the city, just in the streets with my microphone. And one of the things that people kept saying was like, oh, people just don't understand Glaswegian people. And then I met this amazing girl who was like talking about how you tune into people's accents and it just takes a little bit of time and exposure. And it was so interesting to kind of reframe that and think about, like you were saying, it's about experience and sort of tuning into to different ways of speaking. Oh, there was a really great moment in I was transcribing transcribing a sociolinguistic interview once, and it was an interviewer from the south of England. And a speaker who was from the northeast and spoke Doric and was an older guy. And the speaker who was from the south of England was like, how has the area changed in the past 10 years? And then this guy who would have had not that much experience with people from the south of England, like he would have mostly spoken to people from his local community and whatever. And he was like, what's that, hen? And she was like, how has the area changed in the past 5 years? And he's just like, oh, I can't understand you. And like, he just didn't know what she was saying. That was a terrible impression of someone from the Northeast. But it just made me think about how it goes both ways, and how, like how you tune your ears into people over time. And I wonder if like a lot of the problem with people not understanding Scottish accents is that there's not that much exposure of Scottish voices in the media. There is some, but like less so. So yeah, this girl who I met, who I was talking to for the podcast, that was what she's an actress, and she was saying that she often gets told to put on a non-Scottish accent when she's acting for no real reason other than that people might be confused by it or it might be distracting or something like that. And she's very much like, no, but like it's about exposure, and she really wanted to sort of have Scottish voices in the media so that people, so that there is kind of some exposure of that way of speaking. It was really interesting talking to her about it.
Yeah, there's a lot of English hegemony in the UK. So what about the differences between Glasgow and Edinburgh? Is there a rivalry? Are the dialects very different? How do people feel about each other?
There's a very playful rivalry. I think that's a universal thing of having two big cities quite near each other, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so there is a stereotype in Glasgow that people from Edinburgh sound really posh, which is completely not true. Like, there's a lot of working class communities in Edinburgh, but I think maybe the working class communities in Glasgow have perhaps had a bit more media exposure. So like there's been people like Billy Connolly.
I was always shit at mathematics. I was never ever good, and I don't care. I don't give a shit.
He's quite a famous comedian from Glasgow, and Kevin Bridges more recently, and Frankie Boyle, and kind of other big comedians who would kind of speak in a more working class Glaswegian way. Lemmy, who is my favourite comedian from Glasgow.
Telling you, if you don't start appreciating me, I'll fucking leave, eh? Fucking leave, and take that fucking accent away.
And they all have been from Glasgow rather than Edinburgh. So there's kind of that idea of people from Edinburgh being really posh, which is not quite right. But yeah, there's also quite different dialects. So for example, if you wanted to say, so people from Glasgow would usually say don't, and people from Edinburgh would usually say dinny instead. So people in Glasgow say things like canny, willny, amny, and those are all in Edinburgh as well. But there's, for some reason, people in Glasgow tend to say don't, and people in Edinburgh tend to say dinny. There's the word ken in Edinburgh, which doesn't really get used much in Glasgow. So in Glasgow, it would normally be I don't know, and in Edinburgh, you get I dinny ken. Also in Edinburgh, there's this kind of tag on the end of sentences where people say eh. Quite a bit. So
it's like very Canadian.
Yes, it is. And I don't know what the connection is between, like, I don't know if it is the same A or if it's just a coincidence that we have it in both places.
I mean, Canada was there were a lot of Scottish immigrants to Canada towards the beginning,
right?
So it's possible.
So it could well be that it's travelled. This is the thing, I know quite a lot about sort of language in Scotland today, but I really need to brush up on the history. I tend to not know that much about the history unless I've studied that specific linguistic feature. But yeah, so you get A so that's something people make fun of a lot with Edinburgh people.
I know that feeling.
Yeah. And that's so that's kind of Edinburgh, and then further up in Fife, up the coast as well. What other differences are there? I mean, there's differences just in vowel sounds and in the way that the R sound is produced and things like that, but they're much more subtle. The ones that people kind of notice and comment on are always kind of, the differences, the same kind of things that people say about, like, Canadians say this and Americans say this. Is it beanie and is it toque? Is it toque? Right, yeah. So those are the ones that people always pick up on and laugh about, right? So there's subtle differences and sort of not so subtle differences between Edinburgh and Glasgow. But yeah, I think the big myth is that everyone from Edinburgh sounds really, really fancy, and everyone from Glasgow doesn't, because obviously there's a working class in Edinburgh and there's a middle class in Glasgow, and I think sometimes that gets forgotten about when people are talking about the way people speak in different parts of Scotland.
I mean, even I had that in my head that was true, and I where I picked that up from, I don't know. Well, I mean, and obviously it can't be true.
I suppose, like, if you move beyond language as well, you know, Edinburgh's got this big castle. Edinburgh, you know, stuff's going to happen in Edinburgh. There's a castle. There's Drawbridge. I don't know if there's actually drawbridges. There's a palace in Edinburgh. There's a parliament. And
I love it. Like, thinking about how, like, your language sounds like you have a drawbridge.
Exactly. Yeah,
that's
like,
amazing.
Edinburgh's got all those trappings, and Glasgow's much more of a, like, post-industrial city. So yeah, and Glasgow's definitely had kind of much more, like, publicity about sort of, like, well, yeah, I mean, to some extent. I mean, people always talk about, like, the Glasgow slums in the past and stuff, but I think all that did exist in Edinburgh too, so it's all smoke and mirrors.
Yes.
You know, I think this is like a really good way to see how absolutely absurd it is to think that language, like, there's nothing inherent in language that tells us about class or about anything of the speakers. Like, we do this to language, and just, like, it's total proof that it's a proxy for other things.
Oh, yeah.
You're judging other people for their language. Like, you're saying, so-and-so will think that they sound posh. And I'm like, that's absurd. It all sounds the same to me. How would I know? You know, it's like, it makes no sense.
Right.
But
right.
It's fascinating, it's sad, it's funny, it's so many things.
No, you're totally right. And I get the same thing when I'm listening to people talk about other like languages which I don't speak. If you ask people who speak languages you don't speak and say like, oh, you know, what do people from this part say? And people will sort of say like, you know, they pronounce their vowel like ooh and we pronounce it like ooh, you know, that kind of thing. And if you're not familiar, if you're not tuned into it, it reveals how absurd it is. But then obviously when you tune into it in your own head and your own linguistic experience, you see how things get that meaning. But yeah, totally. You can see how it's always a proxy for something else. Like, what do you really mean when you complain about the way someone says the ooh vowel?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Wow, I think there's lots more things we could talk about, but I mean, time's a ticket.
Yeah.
So is there any last thing that you would like to leave our listeners with?
Oh, anything I'd like to leave? I don't know. I'm really stoked to be on the same kind of mission as you guys. We should definitely keep in touch. But yeah, I think I love what you guys are doing. I'm a big fan of the podcast. Long time listener, first time caller. And yeah, I think.
Oh my god, that was the best use of that.
I think I feel like, and this could be just my experience, it's maybe not universal, it could be totally wrong, but I feel like at the moment, language is one of the few things in the world where we're moving in a good direction in general.
Yeah.
And we're not there yet, and there's still a lot of linguistic prejudice and discrimination. And maybe I'm just in this little bubble where people are kind of questioning their assumptions and thinking about the lies they've been told in the past about good ways of speaking and bad ways of speaking. But I feel like it's one of the few places where we're moving in a good direction. And I think it is really important because it's so bound up with identity and who we are. And if I get to be even a little part of that journey, making podcasts about it and doing research on it, then I think that's really, really exciting. So woo, go us.
Yeah, go us. And I gotta say, you helped me in a positive direction. Even as a linguist, I was like having all of these ideas about Scottish English. Like, I'm not gonna be able to understand anything. Carrie's gonna have to translate for me. I'm just kidding.
I really hope that I explained everything well, because I'm very aware doing this that like I'm speaking to you guys and I'll be speaking to your listeners who don't have as much experience with Scotland, but I'm also probably going to have Scottish people listening. So I would like to say a big sorry if I've said anything that's not right, especially about language outside the Central Belt, which I'll admit I know a bit less about. I'm learning. I'm getting there.
Yeah. We also always welcome like corrections or like,
okay, great, okay.
You know, like more nuances. Like there's always more to learn.
I'll bear that in mind. So if I've pronounced anything wrong, if I've said anything wrong about the different dialect areas of Scotland, but I think I've probably done a good job, right?
Yeah.
I hope so. But you know, I'm on a journey. I'm learning myself. So
we're all on a journey. Yes. As long as we're willing to admit when we're wrong, I think it's really important. Especially for PhDs.
Yes, I was actually complimented in my Viva exam at the end of my PhD for being extremely ready to admit the shortcomings of my thesis. to acknowledge the shortcomings of my thesis. And they said that was really good. And I passed.
I love it. Yes. Well, Dr. Mandy.
I think I knew they were going to ask about that, so I just went in with a list of like, okay, this could have been better, this is wrong, this isn't great. And they were like, okay, you know that, that's good.
That's great.
That's amazing.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being our
Yes,
guest.
thank you.
And we always leave our listeners with, don't be an asshole.
Don't be an asshole.
Is that the correct Scottish way to say
Oh,
it?
yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, we've got like a million words for asshole. I won't go into all of them.
Just one?
Yeah. Just one. Oh, well, arsehole. Arsehole,
yes. I love it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I got my finger goes dirty, so I took a walk. I went up to the country park and hung around till after dark, and the girls got home. Till the girls got home.
The Vocal Fries podcast is produced by me, Carrie Gillen, for Halftone Audio. Theme music by Nick Granum. You can find us on Tumblr, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Vocal Fries Pod. You can email us at vocalfriespod@gmail.com, and our website is vocalfriespod.com.